Welcome back. We're going to construct graphs based on the frequency distribution we constructed in the last video. And the two graphs we're going to create today are a histogram, a contiguous bar chart representing class boundaries and their associated frequencies, and an ogive, which is like a line graph plotting boundaries and the cumulative frequencies. We want to get into the habit of labeling and titling our graphs, so I need to title this a histogram, and I've already drawn a horizontal and vertical axis, but you need a horizontal and vertical axis. Along the horizontal axis, create a series of tick marks, hopefully evenly spaced. I've got 5 classes and 6 boundaries, so I'm going to need 6 tick marks on my horizontal axis. And then at each tick mark, place one of our class boundaries. So we started off with 4.5, and then I have 10.5, and 16.5, 22.5, 28.5, and finally 34.5. And it's a good idea to describe what is being shown here, so I will give this axis a title and just call this boundaries. Along the vertical axis, this is where the frequencies are going to be, and I have the highest frequency I have is 9, so I need to make sure that my frequencies on the vertical axis go up to at least 9, but I'm running a little bit short on space. So I'll create a series of tick marks that are also evenly spaced, and I'll use scaling to make each tick mark at intervals of 2. So I'll label this 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, and give this axis a title and call this frequencies. And of course I'll have 0 down here at the bottom. And now we are ready to start constructing our histogram. The very first class, which runs from 4.5 to 10.5, has 6 data values associated with it. So at 4.5, the tick mark, I'm just going to create a vertical line that goes up to 6, and I'm going to do the same thing for 10.5. The height of each bar represents the frequency associated with that class, and then just join these two lines that I've drawn with the horizontal segment. And there is a vertical bar representing our first class. We're going to do that for all of the succeeding classes now. The second class ends at 16.5 and has a frequency of 9 associated with it, so I need to draw a vertical line that's 9 units high, and that's going to be about halfway between 8 and 10. And then just connect that to my second bar. For the third class, which has a frequency of 5, I'm going to draw a vertical line at 22.5, draw a line up until I'm at around where 5 is, and connect it to the bar that we just drew in the previous class. For the class ending at 28.5, we have a frequency of 3, so that bar needs to be 3 units high. And finally, 34.5, that has a frequency of 2, so I want to create a bar that's 2 units high and connect it with the class that we just drew. And there is a histogram. Of course, yours will be neater on paper and pencil than this tablet that I'm drawing on here. The only time there will be a gap in the bars of the histogram is if our distribution contains a class that doesn't have any data values associated with it. And that does happen from time to time. But in this particular case, all of our classes had at least one data value associated with it, so we didn't have any gaps in the bars. And that's your histogram. Now let's turn our attention to the ogive. So the ogive is constructed in a very similar fashion, but instead of bars, we're going to just create a sort of a line graph. You'll see when I've created it. But this is going to be an ogive, so I'm going to plot this. I'm going to give this a label of ogive. And again, I need a horizontal and vertical axis. And I want to create my tick marks like I did before. And label them. So 4.5, 10.5, 16.5, 22.5, 28.5, and finally 34.5. And of course these are going to be the boundaries. Along the vertical axis, well, this time I'm going to be plotting cumulative frequencies, and you'll notice that the cumulative frequency, the last value is 25, so we need to make sure that our vertical axis goes up to 25. And of course I'm short on space here, so I'm going to create a series of tick marks, hopefully evenly spaced. And I'll use scaling to make each tick mark at intervals of 5. Because this represents a graph of cumulative frequencies, I'm accumulating data values as I pass through each class. And when we start this, we haven't accumulated any observations. So at the class boundary of 4.5, I don't have any data values that are smaller than 4.5. So I'm going to put a dot along the horizontal axis because I have no data values that I've accumulated at 4.5. But by the time I've reached 10.5, I've accumulated 6 observations because 6 of my data values have gone into the first class. So over 10.5, I want to put a dot at about where a height of 6 would be. And by the time I have reached 16.5, 15 of my observations have been accounted for, so I'm going to put a dot over 16.5 tick mark at around a height of 15. Well, at the height of 15, not around a height of 15. 22.5, I've got 20 observations accounted for by that time. At 28.5, 23 of my observations have been accounted for. And finally, when I reach the very last class boundary, 34.5, all 25 of my data values have been accounted for. And now I just connect all of those dots with a line. And there is my ogive. An ogive is always either increasing or steady, but an ogive will never decrease. And that's construction of histograms and ogives. See you next time.